It's going live. It's now live. So we are now on the online television called Google Hangouts. So Google Hangout 24. Ed, welcome. I have a special guest from England today. Ed, welcome. A few words for you.
Thanks, Boris. So yeah, my name's Ed Elliott. I've worked with SQL Server since about 2005, but I had about 4 years where I went off and worked as a C# developer and did sort of lots of interesting things with sort of TDD and and then sort of about the beginning of this year I've come back as a SQL developer. So I'm sort of I'm one of these people who's experienced something else and then come back and sort of been a little bit horrified that the Agile hasn't really touched SQL Server that much. So trying to see.
So in general, you have both the SQL background and the C# background.
Yeah, sort of jack of all trades, probably master of none, really. But
okay, and we decided to talk about something that is quite interesting, I believe. You said that you can talk really a lot, and it's an important topic to talk about unit testing in SQL Server. What is unit testing at? Why do we need to know about this?
Well, I think there's sort of, if you take a step back, really, I mean, there's two types of testing that we should do when we're writing code. There's sort of integration testing, and then there's unit testing, and I think that there's a place for both, really, and that often people, when they start testing, they're not really sure what the differences are. So I think if we just sort of start with, if you've got a system, a program, maybe it's quite old, it hasn't got any tests at all, you might want to start with integration tests. And what the integration tests do is you test like an end-to-end process. So as SQL developers, we might not have anything to do with that, really. It might be that you've got a UI, the website, and so you have something that drives the UI to create a user, or to register a user, or to take a payment. And it sort of checks the end-to-end process. And as part of the integration testing, a lot of the SQL Server functionality gets tested. Okay. So often when you talk to people about unit testing, they say, but we haven't got any tests at all, so where do we start? So I say probably don't start with unit tests, start with integration testing, and get a base level of coverage of your application. Then once you've got that, what you can do is you can use unit testing to really improve the quality of the actual work you've got, the T-SQL code, or whatever the code is.
Okay.
But as well as improving the quality, you also provide the facility to sort of document to some extent your actual code, and to make it easier to work with. And the thing that I like about testing, really, is it makes it actually, if you unit test your work and you write tests for the code that you're going to write, you often find that you fix bugs and you fix issues before they go and before you even check in the code. If your people are checking in code, but before you pass it on to the next team or before it goes live. And that's a really nice feeling, to be able to fix stuff before it's actually...
I can imagine, yeah. So in general, let me see if I understood this correctly. So we have two types of tests as a SQL developers, and the first one is the integration one, which in general tests whether or not, for example, our graphical user interface matches the functionality inside SQL Server and what is passed on to the GUI, right? Yeah. And the next one is the one that you are talking about, the unit tests that actually try to improve the code, see whether or not there are bugs, somehow document also the code. Is that correct?
Exactly, and the point of an integration test is they test that when a user comes to the site, they can register, and as part of that registration, it creates a user, it sends out an email. Maybe it creates an account.
The general functionality, whether or not the functionality works at all.
Exactly, yeah, and as part of doing that often tests a lot of code. And then unit tests, you want to write a unit test specifically for a stored procedure or a function, or in some cases even a foreign key or a default or a constraint. If they're critical to your application, it makes sense to me certainly to write a unit test to check that they're working.
Yeah, so who does that? Is that the QA, meaning is that some quality assurance engineer? Is that the responsibility of a developer? Who does that?
Personally, I think it's the responsibility of the developer. Often you have QA teams. It's not often that you have developers working inside the QA team to write unit tests. And the thing is, it's not just about writing unit tests to test the actual code, which is obviously quite important, but it's if you start writing unit tests and you write a unit test first, you sort of help to structure the code that you're going to write. So they actually help you to write better code. And in effect, often when you write code, you then write like a test app to run the code, just to sort of to debug it and make sure it actually works and does what you expect. And that sort of tests, like examples, effectively are your tests. And if you use the tests, then they're always there, they're repeatable, and everyone has access to those.
Okay, so that sounds to me pretty nicely. Meaning that's pretty nice. Have you seen places? Have you been in situations when this part of the development is skipped, meaning that no one does it?
Yes, I mean it's something that personally myself I have skipped it. I've gone, you know what, we're in a hurry. Let's just get straight to the code. Let's write some code. Let's get it out and get it done.
I know that this works. I don't have to test it, right?
Yeah, and it always takes longer. Just it's just. I haven't seen a case where I've tried to get something done quickly, so I've cut corners and it's actually worked. No, it's not true.
So in general, everyone should plan for this, right? Everyone should spend some time. And what are the best practices here? How much time should this take? Do you define how much time should you spend on testing, or is it till we find and fix everything?
Well, I mean, the problem is that having a test, the test is expensive. It takes time to set up and to maintain as well. So if you take like it's quite an extreme example, but if you want to test like a foreign key, for example, if you want to say in your reference tables, it's for legal genders, you've got male and female. So you've got two possible values which are allowed to be set by that foreign key. So you might have a test that's where it allows male and then female. But if you have a reference table that's got 1,000 entries, then you don't want to have a test for every single 1,000 possible entries.
Oh, yes.
Also, you don't want to have a test for every possible value that it couldn't be, so whatever like the max int value is. So it's important to just sort of think a little bit about, okay, what's actually useful. So if I'm testing a foreign key, try to test one of the values works and one value that doesn't work, and make sure that the value that should be there works and the value that shouldn't be there doesn't work.
Yeah, okay, that's cool. So what is the general approach? How we do those unit tests? What can we use?
So it really depends on your level of experience and what you're skilled in. If you're a T-SQL developer, then write your in T-SQL. There's frameworks like T-SQL-T, but I'd say if you haven't had any experience with testing, then just start off simply write a script just to set up your data you need, test whatever it is you want to test, and then verify the results. If you're a C# developer, write your test in C#, either just by calling stored procedures or calling code straight from C# as you would do normally, or there's unit tests within Visual Studio, Microsoft unit tests, or the stuff like dbFit.
Okay.
But it really depends on where your sort of level of experience is, because I mean, if you start looking up TDD and like unit testing, that there's basically like a whole world of confusion just heading your way. I mean, there's sort of people say like, oh, you've got to isolate your dependencies. There's like mocking, and there's all these frameworks which to start with, if you haven't got an experience with that, it's really quite daunting. So I really would say just start simply. Basically all you want to do with a test is you want to set up some data, you want to run some code, and then you want to verify the results, and that's all it is. And then once you've done that, maybe do a few of those, and then look to find a framework to help you. So if you're a T-SQL developer, I'd look at T-SQL-T. If you're a C# developer, look at either dbFit or one of the frameworks in C#.
Yeah, in general, you speak about this T-SQL-T. That's a framework? Is that free thing, or a developer should pay for this?
Yeah, so T-SQL-T itself is free. There's a plugin for SQL Management Studio from Red.
Cool enough.
You have to pay for, but by all means, you don't need to pay for that at all. You can just run the scripts manually. But if you're new to testing, then it does actually help.
Okay, and how can this framework help us? How can we use it on our side? Let's go this way.
Cool. So there's two things it does. So if you imagine when you want to run a test, you set up some data, then you do some sort of operation, like you run a stored procedure and you get some result. So really, you want to have a clean database, and you sort of every time you start, you want it to be in a known state. So what T-SQL does is it wraps everything in transactions. So whatever changes are made throughout the test run will get run back, or get sort of rolled back again.
Okay.
It really helps with that, and it also provides a framework for sort of for the way you name tests. And then you have, if you use the Redgate tool, you have a nice list of tests and they're ordered, and you can choose to run individual tests or run the whole test suite, and then you get the results back. So it's a nice actual test runner, I suppose, which is like the first part. And even if you just use that to start with, that's a great way to get you a great way to start with unit testing.
Okay, so in general, but by the way, so the framework, is this framework coming from Redgate, or is it something totally independent?
It's totally independent, but Redgate have the add-in for it.
Oh, okay, that's cool. So in general, if you are someone that just starts and probably hears that he has to do unit testing now from a recording of this, because at the moment no one for some reason watches online. We'll talk about this with the community later on. But if you hear for first time that you have to do testing, you should probably go and do this with T-SQL, plain and simple.
Yeah.
Just imagine some scenarios and write them and do the tests. Probably do insert some fictional data or something, just some data, and test with it, right? And if you then go and become more advanced, probably go and use this framework, etc.
Yeah, I would. I mean, effectively, no matter whether you're using the framework or if you do it yourself, you want to set up your database, get it in a known state, then you want to run some code, run a stored procedure to create a user, for example. Then you want to check that it's done what it should have done, that it's created the user, that everything's in the right state, and if it's correct, all good. If it's wrong, then I mean, you can just in T-SQL you can use raise error or throw in the newer servers.
Okay, so do you know whether or not there are some resources on this topic? Meaning that as everything, I think, not as everything, but as many things, it sounds simple, but I don't believe it is, because that doesn't quite happen in our world. Are there any resources, websites, probably blogs, where someone can read something and probably start from there?
Yeah, so I suppose for T-SQL unit testing, the only real the sites available or sort of stuff is on the Simple Talk. If you go into Simple Talk, there's some examples on how to test and how to use T-SQL.
Yeah.
T-SQL itself has got some examples. They typically use some more advanced things like mocking and using fake tables, which again is if you've got a background in TDD, maybe in another language, is quite simple. But if it's first time you're looking at testing, I'll definitely just sort of try and stay away from that a little bit until you know what you're doing. But then for sort of unit testing generally, I mean, if you just remove the words T-SQL and just search for unit testing, there's a sort of a wealth of
resources. Probably not only resources, but also approaches to how you should go in this direction, right?
Yeah, definitely. And you sort of think, oh, you know what, the T-SQL and SQL Server is completely different to everything else, so nothing can apply. But but actually, you know, it does. It's sort of it's all code. You know, you should structure your code nicely. You should learn how you should make you write your code in clean code sort of style.
Okay, so first up, Simple Talk, the website. If someone doesn't know that site, I believe they missed a lot there. I will point to that resource in the blog post to which we will follow up this video. But absolutely, Simple Talk is just amazing.
Yeah.
And
and there's Microsoft have got some guidance on how to use the unit testing framework within Visual Studio, but it means writing tests basically in C# or VB.NET. But if anyone's got experience with that, then I mean I'll add a link to that as well.
Okay, you will send me this one. That will be also helpful. And once you probably last question, let's go this way. Once you become familiar with unit testing, you see the benefits, you see how you fix problems before going into production, and everything is fine. what happens when you become more advanced? What are those techniques that you are talking about? What are those fake tables or something like this?
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us a bit more insight here?
So I suppose once you've moved beyond just having a couple of unit tests,
Yeah.
you've got maybe you've got sort of a good test coverage of your whole database. First of all, it gives you the facility to start refactoring and start changing things, knowing that if I change this column or I split this table into two,
Yeah.
You already know which stored procedures are going to be affected by that. So,
okay, so there are some dependencies.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
So there's that side of things, which is really good. And then, so the idea of fake tables is basically called mocking in other languages. So what you do is you say you have a stored procedure that inserts to a table, say a user table.
Okay.
And that user table, it requires you to insert, I don't know, like 19 columns, and there's like 30.
Oh.
30. So
Okay.
there's like 10 reference tables, and you have to have the right values in each of these. So what mocking allows you to do is say, actually, you know what? I don't want to make sure every time I run this test that the whole database is in a known state. So what I do is I'll create a fake table. It just lets me insert the data I care about. So I can run the stored procedure, and I can check whether like 3 or 4 reference tables have the right data in them.
Okay.
It just basically gives you the way to test without having to put everything into a known state, and you can just isolate your tests to the parts you're interested in.
Okay, so I am now privileged to work with quite some clever developers, and behind me there is a QA engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I have heard correctly, probably somewhere in the past, is there a way, have you heard about a way to automate testing?
Yes.
Somehow? Because I don't want to do that. I know it's important, but I don't have time. Can I just fire up some tests which are pre-built for me?
So do you mean the automated creation of unit tests, or do you mean?
Yes, some tests, some unit testing, which is just automated. I don't have to define. I don't have to fill in any data anywhere. It will just do everything for me and return me the result.
Well, to a limited extent, there is. I mean,
okay.
SQL, like sort of all our DMSs, is great in that you can explore your environment. You can examine stored procedures, what parameters it uses, and tables, what parameters they use. So to some extent, you can flesh them out, and you can say create a set of tests that test each of your stored procedures, and then perhaps you just got to go into them and say, well, actually, the result of this one should be this, and these are the elements I'm going to use. So to some extent, yes.
Oh, okay, that's nice. That's nice. I like this.
Yeah.
So, okay, Ed, where can people find more about you? Let's go this way.
For more about me, I suppose Twitter, and I'll give you details of my blog as well.
Okay, so you have your own blog, and I personally know you from Twitter, where you are very active and helping. So definitely, if you have any question related to testing, Ed can be pretty helpful here. And you will send me a link to your blog.
Sure, I will do. And I suppose if anyone's got questions about Intest and they say, you know what, it just doesn't work in this environment, it just will not work, then come talk to us, email or Twitter or some way. Just we can find a way to make it work. I know we can.
That's cool. And last question, what do you write in your blog? Is that testing, or is it in general development topics, etc.?
It's sort of a mixture of development topics and sometimes some in SQL internals, but
okay, cool. That's quite cool.
But I wouldn't say I'm an avid blogger every week. I try and blog when I can.
Oh, okay. That's fair enough. Okay, Ed. So it was a pleasure to have you here. Number 24, one of my favorite numbers because of some basketball players, and probably one of the best hangouts till now. A lot of useful information, at least for me. Hopefully other people will hear you. Hopefully developers will hear you. Let's go this way, because I'm not that kind of. I'm not developing meaning I'm not a SQL developer. but I do some development sometimes, and you opened my eyes for some things, definitely.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, so very cool. Thank you very much for being here. I will share this video with as many people and as many developers as I can, I promise.
Great, thanks Boris, it's been really interesting.
Hope to see you somewhere probably hope to see you somewhere in England next year. We'll see.
Perfect, yeah.
Okay, see you, and see you on Twitter after a moment, probably. Cool. Cheers, Ed. Whoop.